Welcome back to another episode of Rough Edges. I'm here with Ruby, and we've got a special guest on today, which goes by the name of Simone. And this episode is different because we're doing it on Zoom, as we can't be in person because of lockdown. So Simone, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a bit about what you do?
Yeah. Yes. Hello, everybody. I'm Simone, as Elijah said. I work for a pregnancy support service in Islington, and I've been there for around 2 months, so I'm quite new. But I am a counsellor, technically. But I'm in this job, I'm not doing loads of counselling, but I'm a fundraising manager and an operations manager. So I run the operational side of the work that we do. And the organisation exists to support women with any kind of pregnancy crisis. So it could be unplanned pregnancy or some form of pregnancy loss, or women with young children who need support in parenting or raising their kids. Anything like that, really. It's a fantastic charity. I'm a big fan. I'm a little bit biased, but we're the best. And we do lots of amazing things with families in North London, but also in other parts of London.
What is like your favourite part? Because then you're a counsellor, aren't you? Like you studied how to become a counsellor. What is your favourite part of the job? What is the highest moment and the lowest moment, actually? That'd be a good question.
Oh, good question. There's loads of highest moments for sure. I think getting to talk to people, I guess this is also the reason why I love counselling. Like you get to meet with people who are really vulnerable in a moment. So when you're at a crisis point and you're desperate and struggling and you might not have anyone to talk to, or you're panicking about what decision you're going to make, particularly if you find out you're pregnant and you weren't planning to be pregnant. It's a really terrifying time for people, for the woman, but also for the people around her. And yeah, one of my highlights is the fact that I can be a safe space for somebody. We can provide a safe space for somebody. I think everybody deserves and needs a place to talk and process what you're going through and to learn more about yourself and your feelings. So a high point is always where I'm chatting to somebody and they just get a lot of relief and understanding and kind of met with love and empathy, which is I think what Jesus does. So I think it's really important. So yeah, high points are when somebody connects with you and they're met with that safe response. And then low points are, it's like, because as a counsellor we have or try to have empathy and compassion and kind of really step into the place of where people's at. And so when you do that, you inevitably take on some of what they're feeling, which can be really, really heavy, especially when you're talking about pregnancy. And if a lot of people who are pregnant and haven't planned to be have probably had a traumatic experience in their past somewhere, or is really struggling with managing those feelings, really conflicted. It's a really big issue. Your options are really controversial. Like, do you have an abortion? Do you carry on with the pregnancy? Do you look into fostering? Yeah, they're all really big topics. So sitting with somebody in that is really, really difficult. It can be difficult. So it's kind of like two sides of a coin, really. On one side, it's really beautiful and wonderful that I get to be in that position. And on the other side, it's really heavy and hard, basically. So yeah, kind of both in the same thing are the highs and the lows.
What sort of influenced you to go into that field of work?
So I used to work for a church in Oxford, and I worked with students. Basically, I was a student pastor, and I got to sit and have coffee with students all day long, which was an absolute joy and a really fun job to have, because it was free coffee as well. I'm also a bit of a coffee snob, so that was a high point. And I realised that I just love talking to people. and I thought about what I wanted to do with my life because I wasn't very sure. I'll probably talk more about this later, but I did a human biology degree for no real reason. I haven't used it at all since then. I barely know anything about the human body, if I'm honest. Mastermind comes on and it's the human body, and I am embarrassingly rubbish. So I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. And I ended up kind of working for church. I stumbled into it a little bit and then realised I love it. I love people, like I love being around them and hearing their stories. And I had some counselling friends and they kind of suggested I went and tried a course. I loved the course and then went on to study it a bit more intensely after that. And so, yeah, I went into counselling for that reason. And then I ended up working for a great charity in East London that provides counselling and all kinds of family support, basically. And that's how I got introduced to kind of the pregnancy work and family work. And it kind of combines my counselling background with this supporting families side of things. So I'll say I kind of fell into it. I don't know how anybody ever finds anything beyond stumbling into it. I can't think of any 16 or 17-year-old that decides they're going to uni to study one thing and then actually carries on that path. We're all just trying to figure it out, innit? Yeah, so stumbled, but also worked out what I really loved on the way. And I really love it. Yeah, I love what we do. I think it's really, really important work. And I think it really blesses and helps the families that we work with.
Yeah. So you touched on coming to church. How did that start?
Yeah. Go full on life story. Full on life
life story. Yeah. So I grew up, in a Christian home. My parents were loosely Catholic. You know them. Easter, Christmas Catholics, and then we became a little bit more Catholic when I wanted to go into a Catholic school. But other than that, faith wasn't a big part of my childhood. And then my mum became a Pentecostal Christian, started going to this Pentecostal church, dragged me and my sisters along with her. I'm from a Black Caribbean family, and you don't have any choice on a Sunday. If your mum's going to church, you're going to church. I didn't like it at all, didn't have any friends, found the youth group weird, like Christians were weird, to be honest. And I decided to leave as soon as I could, which was around 15 or 16. And I also had, I guess, as a teenager, as we probably all do, some conflicting issues with my parents about what faith meant. Had some financial issues in my family, which had a massive effect on me and my sisters and my relationship with my parents for a number of ways. And all of this stuff kind of led me to think that God was a complete waste of time, essentially, or he was too stressful to think about because it just resulted in arguments with my parents, and I didn't like church anyway. Just kind of lost interest, I guess. And I decided that I didn't want anything to do with church. And then as soon as I could go to uni, I basically went and had a look at all of the furthest unis that I possibly could so that I could get away, and ended up going to Oxford Brookes. Shout out Oxford Brookes, best uni ever. It's really not. And I did human biology there, which was it was a really interesting degree, to be fair. I don't hate the fact that I did it, but the thing about uni for me that was most important was that I was at a really low point when I first moved. Like, I felt depressed. I didn't have any friends, but I met 2 people very randomly, like a few months in, because I decided either I was leaving uni or I was going to force myself to make some friends. And the 2 people that I met were Christians and ended up taking me to church. And I decided in that moment to kind of get rid of all of my past thoughts about church and all my issues with my understanding, my experience of faith and of God, and kind of just start again really on my own. And I started to learn about who God was, and I had these friends who weren't weirdos, which was a big pull for me. And then I remember kind of having to decide if I was going to be Christian or not. And I ended up going on a missions trip to Turkey. And I'm not going to lie, the only reason I went was because my friends were going.
Yeah.
And then a few weeks before we were due to leave, one of my friends pulled out. And then the day before we were going to leave, my other friend had a car crash. So I was going on this missions trip to Turkey on my own, basically, with a bunch of Christians who I didn't know very well, which felt horrible the day I was leaving, but just turned out to be the best thing ever. And it was on that trip that I really would say that I kind of gave my life to Jesus and wanted to pursue faith more. And that was all while I was at uni. So over my years at uni, I kept plugging into church, kept going along to different events and bits at uni, and then growing in friendship with the people that I'd met. And then I did a gap year just after uni when I didn't know what I wanted to do. And my gap year was working for church. And I did some theology training on that as well. And then I ended up staying on 3 years after that, working as a student worker at my church. And that's where I just had coffee all the time, which actually they wouldn't thank me for. I wasn't paid to just have coffee all the time. I also did other things like running the student work. We put on weekly events and we'd have weekends away. We did student alphas, and I think we did a jazz night one night, and quizzes and all that kind of stuff. But I enjoyed that job. And then that was when I started thinking about counselling and what I wanted to do. And then I started my counselling journey, basically. So yeah, I kind of, in some way, I've always known who God is, and I've always had kind of faith a little bit in my mind. But it was definitely stepping away from everything that I thought Christianity was, and actually reading and investigating what it really is and who Jesus really is. And I've had a lot of like different theologies in my past as well, like kind of Catholic to really quite African and Caribbean Pentecostal, to my church in Oxford, which was super middle class white British, and now I'm in East End, which is a little bit more of a mishmash, I would say. So yeah.
Oh, that's so cool. I don't think I've ever heard your story before.
Oh,
yeah. So that's like, I love hearing your story. How do you, like, daily, is there anything that you do, like your weekday or like anything to keep you on track with faith? Because it's definitely not easy, is it? It's always up and down.
Yeah, no, it's not easy at all. And I think we drift so much easier than we think we will. We forget how weak we are without God, for sure. In my week, yeah, there's loads of things, I think. People, like for me, it's people. Like I can't pretend that I wake up and I want to read my Bible every day, all the time. But it's talking to friends and people about how their relationship with God is. Are they reading anything interesting? Have they listened to any song? It's, for me, it's stuff in my day that reminds me of God. And then when I'm having a conversation about him or thinking about my relationship with him, that makes me want to pray, and want to read my Bible and want to understand something more about him. I mean, ultimately it's the Holy Spirit, isn't it? Like, I'm not doing anything, but yeah, no, I find that really helps. I like people. I like community. I find it much more fun talking about God with people, and then I want to go and pray about what I've talked about, or something that I'm struggling with, or something like that. And I think the jobs I've had as well, like, make me run to God a lot. So before my job working in the East London Pregnancy Support Service, I worked for 3 years of a New Way, which is a night shelter in East London, kind of similar to Growth, what people might have heard of. And yeah, that was brilliant and challenging. So I was working with vulnerable people, again, homeless people who would come into our day centre and also stay the night at our night shelter. And every day I was meeting people with different stories, with heavy stories. Once in a while there were people that were Christian, but generally they weren't, and people whose lives were just kind of falling apart at that time, really. And I think, like hearing people's hopelessness and then realising the hope that we have in Jesus, like massively sends me running to him. So lots of things. And then there's listening to worship music and apps, like Bible apps. But yeah, I just think it's people and community and the way that you're living and the things that you purposefully put in your week to almost help you remember God. I think that's what is one of the good things about church and Connect Group and having friends who are Christian. It's a constant stream, isn't it? Like a constant realisation that in our humanness, we just drift from God. So we need to do all we can to run back to him.
Do you get any do you get a chance to share your gospel within your field of work, or is it quite are there restrictions on what you can do in terms of sharing your faith?
It depends, really. Generally there's restrictions. So the charity that I work for is a charity with a Christian ethos, but it's not overtly Christian, I would say. So the whole point of the charity, it was started by a group of Christians who wanted to provide a space for people who had experienced abortion and then had a lot of difficult issues that they were struggling with as a result of that and needed a space to talk, or people who discovered they were pregnant and weren't sure what to do. So it came from a Christian background of believing that we are all made in the image of God. It steers away from a political agenda, so we're not pro-choice or pro-life, and we are just there to support the women. So within that, and within counselling as well, like it's not about me sharing who I am or bringing myself into conversation. It's a space for somebody, whatever their beliefs, whatever they're trying to figure out, to be able to come and have someone help them work out what they're feeling. So within that, it's not kind of an appropriate space to share your testimony, really. But then there are other parts of it. There are the family support projects that are run, or in this job we have a baby boutique type thing where we give out free baby clothes and equipment and prams and all that kind of stuff to people. And I guess that feels like a little bit more of a free space to just share who you are and to tell people what you personally believe or think, but not from a more counselling perspective. I'm getting a message. So there's restrictions, but a lot of what we do kind of expresses our faith. Like on our website, it's clear that we're Christian, so to some extent people know who we are. And if somebody comes in and they are Christian and they're talking about their faith or in counselling, like I wouldn't ever shut that conversation down. But as I say, it's about that person. So not really. And then in past jobs, like in the night shelter, there's definitely a lot more space to talk about faith and what you believe. And I would take, any option there really to be able to. But it's an interesting one. I think it's been something that I have battled with, even within counselling. Because there's a part of you that really knows that what someone needs is Jesus. And you're like, I just want to tell you about Jesus, and then you can come to church, and then you wouldn't be so isolated or lonely, and you'd have community, and you'd have wholeness. Your answers. That's really what everything in me wants to say. But it's not what counselling is. It's a safe space for somebody to work out what they think. So I've kind of resolved in myself that there are spaces where you say what you think, even in terms of the abortion issue, like whatever you believe. And I'm quite happy to say I'm anti-abortion as a person, like from my biblical understanding. But I think people need a safe space to work out what they think, and I think Jesus gives us free will to make our own decisions. And I think counselling is a space to work out what you think.
Yeah, I think one thing, it really is a controversial topic, and I know that me and Elijah have like people, you know, personally have gone through like abortion or contemplating abortion and all this sort of thing. So if you come across that Christians push their agenda or push their like the fact, or it comes across as really judgmental. But yeah. Yeah.
Oh, it really can. I think Christians have been awful at judging people and making people feel many different negative things. Which is horrible. Like, especially if you've had an abortion and you understand what a hard experience it is and what a hard decision it is to make. To respond to someone with anything but love is just it's not what I see Jesus doing. Like, I see him responding with love, and I think within myself, I guess, just stepping away from work, I think there are times when you can tell your friend what you think and what you think the Bible says, but we do it with love and with empathy, and understanding that it's really difficult. So I meet women all the time who are just terrified. To find out that you're pregnant and you didn't expect to be is absolutely terrifying. What are you going to do? How are you going to have enough money to raise a child if you chose that? What are other people going to say? There's shame and there's rejection in there. And it's such a complicated feeling and space where you have to work out what you're feeling. And we talk a lot about kind of a crisis point within this area of work. So when you first find out that you're pregnant, or you're first met with any kind of big decision or issue, you go into panic mode a little bit, and then you make rash decisions, and you think about what everybody else would do. And what you need to do is kind of slow down that crisis point a little bit. Like, have a space where you do feel safe to just kind of breathe and pause and work out what you actually think and feel, what's actually going on with you. And that's so important, and that's kind of what we offer. So yeah, don't be judgmental. Don't make people feel bad or ashamed. Just don't do it, is what I would say.
Yeah. And I think this might be the last question. Am I right, Ruby?
Question.
What'd you say?
Go for it.
So the question is, I've written it down. I said I'm definitely going to ask Simone. Is there therapy for dads who have newborns? Although the experience isn't as traumatic for women, there still may be side effects for men. Is there any therapy for men?
Yeah, well, it's definitely less prioritized than women, I would say. There's general therapy out there for everybody, so you can always access therapy, but specific therapy is not really. I think so. Society says many things about dads and about the responsibility. On one side, you've got a society that believes that it's nothing to do with men. It's entirely the woman's decision and issue to deal with, and that it's all on them. And then you've got the other side, which says that no, the dad has to be involved. It's his responsibility too. And then you get different stereotypes about men, shouldn't feel emotions, shouldn't feel traumatized. You should just be strong and be there. So there's so many areas that can mean that it's just as traumatizing in different ways for men, I would say. So I think there needs to be more specific services. So my service particularly would be open to supporting men, but I don't think there's many specific services. But yeah, men need to access counselling and need to work out again what they feel, because one of the issues with not working out what you feel after you've experienced trauma is that it doesn't go away. Like, you're still sitting with the trauma. Like, it will affect you more and more as time goes on, and Jesus doesn't want that for us. Like, he brings healing and he brings hope and he brings oh guys, I'm sorry, my phone is gonna die. And I don't have my charger. Hang on, I'm so sorry.
About the trauma, can that also be as a result from being really young, being affected by things and your behaviour pattern being translated the stuff of like your day-to-day life and you don't even realise?
Yeah, 100%. I think it's something that trauma is something that we all have experienced to different degrees, I would say. And then it's not always necessarily even about the amount of trauma or the size of the trauma. It's about how you have responded to that trauma, to that stimulus. So yeah, 100%. It's if you're young, and you maybe have experienced some things that you haven't processed or aren't able to process, your body will store that, your mind will store that, and especially if you're young and you're still learning things, you're learning behaviours, and you're, even through teenage years, you're kind of still learning who you are and how you relate to the world, then trauma can massively affect that, and if you don't kind of deal with it, it can stay with you long term, and it often comes out in different ways. Yeah.
Can it be passed on genetically as well?
There's I'm not sure evidence wise. I wouldn't necessarily say yes. I wouldn't, not trauma specifically. Trauma is more your response to something that's happened, that you kind of internalize. So it could be passed on if a parent was raising their child in a way that was because they're affected by trauma. I don't know is my honest answer, but I wouldn't say it would be genetic. Mental health issues can have had some links to being genetic, but trauma in itself, not so much, no.
Okay.
Once you said, and I like it stuck with me for and I was like, what the frick, that's wow. You said something like you're so grateful that God is a just God because of how much you like hear, like the stories you hear and the things you have to go, like people have to go through. I wonder if you could share some stories. That would be good if you're up for it.
Yes. Yeah. I think being a counsellor means that you're talking to people who are coming to you because they've had traumatic things happen, basically, and those traumatic things have been caused by someone else, either knowingly or unknowingly. It might be like one specific person, or it might be because of systems or like powers or governments or anything like that. So there's always somebody that's kind of causing that experience, and then when you're hearing that and you're hearing about like the unjustness of the world, like the world is fairly awful at times, things happen and people do things that are just astounding. And I think working in some of the jobs that I've had more recently, like I meet people all the time who have come to England like with immigration issues often because they're fleeing a country or a person, and they've had persecution which is so awful, that they've arrived in this country and they're already traumatized, but they've been through so much and then they now have all these immigration issues here, and they might be pregnant, or they might have young children. They don't know if they're going to be able to stay. So yeah, I can share one or two stories of those experiences. I worked with one mum recently who had come to the UK from Nigeria, and she had married somebody. She'd been forced into a marriage in Nigeria, and the man was awful, and he abused her physically and sexually, to the point where she became pregnant. And then she fled to the UK and met a stranger who took her in to his house, and she thought she was kind of finding a safe space, but what she actually found was another abuser. He was actually a married man who'd kind of brought her into another house, and for a few years she was abused by this man. And she got pregnant and then was forced to have an abortion. Sorry, she'd lost the first baby, and she got pregnant again and was forced to have an abortion. And then she got pregnant again by this man, but didn't want to have an abortion. She wanted to continue the pregnancy. So she fled him and found herself homeless. And then she got housing from social services, but still hasn't got an immigration status here. So she's still applying for opportunity to stay here. And if you've ever had an experience with the Home Office, you know it's a very long, nightmarish process. And so she's here now, and she's had her son, and he is 7 months old. And we met her at this point where she'd just been completely traumatized. So she'd experienced a family who had essentially forced her to get married. Then she'd experienced abuse in that first marriage. And then she came here and thought she'd find safety. And she experienced more abuse. And then when she had her baby, she had to choose whether to continue with the pregnancy or have an abortion, which is a really tough decision, knowing that you don't have any money, you don't have work, you don't have permission to work here, you don't have permission to live here. And I think, yeah, when you talk to people like that and you hear what they've been through, there's no way that you can judge that person for the decision that they're making. You don't understand what they've been through. You might have a biblical opinion of what you think the Bible says is the best way to do things. But if you can look at that person with judgment in your heart, then I think there's something wrong with you, and you should probably pray about that rather than something being wrong with them. So, yeah, I think like that is just, it's a purely unjust story. Like those two men in her life were awful and were wrong. And inflicted a lot of trauma on her. And yeah, I guess that's that side that's difficult of our work. You hear a lot of stories like that. It's quite a high percentage of women who have an abortion because they don't feel like there's any other way forward, which is a sad statistic. Because if you want to continue with your pregnancy and you're not able to, and then you have an abortion because of that, that's extreme trauma as well. There's guilt that comes out, and shame, and a whole range of things. Yeah, we've also worked with lots of women who domestic violence is kind of a big reason that a lot of people find themselves in unplanned pregnancy, but equally young people, people with mental health issues. Sometimes there's just like people who are just living their daily life and find out that they're pregnant. We know that happens all the time. So yeah, it can be really difficult, but you don't know somebody's backstory. You don't know their life or how they feel, or even how they experience trauma. They might have been through similar things to you, but the way that it's impacted them is completely different to how it's impacted you.
Like as a result of her first husband, can not dealing with the first instance of trauma have like a knock-on effect, and you can kind of find yourself ending up in the same scenario? Is that quite common?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think cycles of repeated trauma is definitely common, especially if you're in an abusive relationship where somebody is quite manipulative and is making you believe what they're saying or their manipulation. You're with that, could be with that person for a long time, and you just start to believe everything that they say. You believe that about yourself, like your self-worth goes down and your self-confidence goes down. And then you leave that situation and you meet somebody else and it's familiar, like you're used to that pattern of behavior. You then start to think it's normal, or is it just me? And then kind of some of the classic symptoms of domestic violence is you start cutting off your friends and your community and people that know you, and then it's just this person's word in your head, and that can definitely happen time and time again. Yeah, easily, I would say.
Wow. So, yeah, that's it's a bit crazy to think that you can actually like almost like gravitate to a situation because you've been through it again, and that's where you find comfort a bit. Or you think you find comfort.
Yeah.
Is there anything you'd like to say to finish?
Yeah, I think everybody should get counselling. Yeah, I think everybody should get counselling. I think we're all messy. We've all been through stuff. We all don't understand ourselves properly. We could all use a safe space to talk. So yeah, I would say if you have experienced anything that is causing you to feel low or depressed or anxious or ashamed, whatever that might be, big or small, and you need somewhere to talk or you need a safe space to work out what you think, there's no shame in that. It's so important that you go and get some help now, some support to learn how to deal with it. Do it now. Talk to me if you need to. I can point out some good counselling spaces, for sure.
Especially because it's lockdown as well now. So I'm guessing like people indoors and people stress is going to be much more higher because of less social activity.
Yeah.
Is your plan going to be quite full over this lockdown month?
Yes and no. We're okay at the moment, actually. So if people, particularly for pregnancy related issues, wanted support, then you can go to Choices Islington. And if you want generic counselling, it's a little bit harder to find. I'd recommend Crossroads Service, which is in Bethnal Green in East London. They might have a bit of a waiting list, but they're brilliant. And that, if you want any recommendations for where to go, then I'm happy for people to get in touch, and I can suggest some places. But yeah, through lockdown, it's really difficult. Isolation, even just the dark, being in the dark, being at home all the time, not going out. It all adds to mental health issues, for sure.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Simone.
The podcast. Loved having you.
No problem.
No, thank you so much.
Thanks. Love being here.